I'm Father Dave Pavanka. As president of Franciscan University of Steubenville, it is my joy to meet people from all over the United States and around the world. They're talented, they're holy, fiery, and funny, and I so enjoy speaking with them. Recently, I had an in-depth conversation with author, wife, and mother Emily Stimpson Chapman about her new book, Letters to Myself from the End of the World. This inspiring, wise, and entertaining book is a collection of letters Emily wrote to her 25-year-old self during the turbulent summer of 2020. Emily and I spoke about her book's themes of suffering, hope, and food and the Eucharist, adoption and motherhood, the power of grace to transform every part of our lives. And this is our conversation. One of the stories I love of Francis is he was up in a cave above Assisi, and for Francis, like below in the valley was everything he didn't want. It's where the poor lived, it's where the lepers were, so he wanted to always be on the top, right? So there's this story of him in a cave and just going before the Lord and really pouring out his heart before the Lord, and he's wrestling with lepers. Lepers for Francis were, again, everything that he did. They had no power, they had no influence, they had no status, they had no standing. So he just repulsed by lepers. And the Lord says to him, he says, I can make that which is bitter sweet, which is such a beautiful image. So then the next scene is Francis is down in the valley and he engages this leper and he embraces the leper and he discovers Christ in that. And for me, that's something I've just found myself reflecting on. First, everyone says, why is Francis so peaceful? Why is he? Well, because of that. Imagine a life with no bitterness. And I think that's the challenge of the gospel. And you do it so beautifully in your letters to yourself and your enemy. You know, what Jesus says about loving your enemy is profoundly radical. And I might say, at times, difficult.
For me, they're probably the most difficult teachings.
Yeah.
You know, I can remember, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, when I was 25 and I come back to the church and I was so proud of myself. You know, I went to mass every day. I was going to confession all the time. I was, practicing chastity and saving sex for marriage. And I was doing all these really, hard countercultural things for Jesus. And they are hard and they are countercultural. But I have had a much harder time with the church's teachings to love my enemy and to bear wrongs patiently and to turn the other cheek than I have with anything else. I'm like, okay, chastity, I can do that, But wait, you want me to love this person who doesn't love me? You want me to take this incredible wrong that's been done to me and not lash out, not get angry, not even post about it on social media and complain about how mad I am.
Well, see, Jesus didn't have to deal with social media. It might have been different. It might have been different.
It's true. It's true.
But I think that's right. I've written over the years about this. Jesus said what? Because there's some scriptures that we just really love that he says. But that whole enemy thing, love, not just put up with, but love, do good for, that's incredibly difficult.
Someone asks you to go 1 mile, go 2. It's almost counterhuman is in some ways.
What's supernatural?
It's so instinctual to want to lash out, to let anger lead, to want vengeance. That he's asking you to live the divine life. He's asking you to allow to be done to you in a certain sense what was done to him, and that's to be crucified.
I actually love what you said because it's easy for us to focus on the individual we're supposed to love and that kind of thing, but you talk about, and I thought it was beautiful, you said you have so much compassion, speaking to yourself as a youngin'. You have so much compassion for the one who sinned against, but for the one doing the sinning, you have almost none. You lack mercy, and so you sin, even while fighting against sin.
Yeah.
That's that's very self-aware, and the fact that you're not merciful or kind to that person.
No, and we've already talked, I'm a redhead.
Yes, that's been established. We've got
it's
that.
Fading a little bit, but the temperament is still there. I'm a redhead, I'm a choleric, and justice is really important to people with choleric temperaments. I want justice. When friends are wronged, when somebody else is wronged, I'm like, all right, I want God to smite the person who did the wronging. But what I've learned in time is that I'm sinning when I do that. To to be cruel, to be cutting, to wish ill upon another person, even if that person has done something bad. It's natural, but it goes against what Christ has asked me to do.
Because you talk about that. You talk about anger and that you might at times be angry. It says, but at the same time, any kind of anger, even righteous anger, is a dangerous emotion. Often it moves faster than reason. It gets out ahead of your better judgment.
Yeah.
And that is our natural tendency, is we want to just lash out. And
No, I mean, anger is a powerful force. And St. Thomas Aquinas says that there's times where if you're not feeling anger, if you're not reacting emotionally with anger, you're doing an injustice because something truly wrong has been done. But we talked about this with the church. There's faith and reason. So it is reasonable to be angry about so many of the great and little evils that are done in the world. But Christ has given us a different way. And so in faith, we have to act differently than the world acts in response to that injustice.
right. How do you not become a doormat for that, though? What does that look like? So that, yes, you need to stand up for yourself. You need to stand up for injustice. But it's not to say, is it discernment? Is it, how do you engage? What do you do? What should you say? What should you write? How should you respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is discernment. And there's always, obviously, if you are in an abusive relationship.
Of course, yep.
You walk away. If you are in an office environment where it's sucking the life out of you and you're being harassed or you're being abused in some way, go away. You don't have to be a doormat. But when you walk away, you can't commit an injustice in return.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to defend yourself, you defend yourself in charity. You don't do it you don't do it by lashing out. You don't do it by dragging the other person down. I think it's always that discernment. What is the most loving way for me to leave the situation? What is the way for me to leave the situation that doesn't damage another person's soul or my own, or damage another person's reputation or my own? Because often we make ourselves look worse when we start defending ourselves. And, we don't, but sometimes you're like, you protest too much. Sometimes taking the higher road is also the more politically practical role. But yeah, there's discernment. There's times you have to say, all right, do I need to defend myself in this case, or can I just let it go? I think there's a lot of prayer. There's talking to good and wise counsel, but always making sure you are not committing an injustice in your response to injustice.
Some might say following the Lord is difficult sometimes.
Do you think? Who are those people, Father?
Isn't that something?
I don't know those people.
Because like you said, there's at times every part of you, even especially when I'm right, which, let's be honest, I'm not always right. But that wanting everybody to know it, and wanting, but you said the world would have had Jesus leap off the cross and overcome his tortures with a mighty show of strength that he would have just, as you said, smited. That's why I always joke that I would not be a good God. There would be a lot more smiting going on. But that's what they would have expected. This talk about injustice, a profound injustice. What was thrust upon Christ was a profound injustice, and the way he handled it might teach us something about how to go about this.
Right. And it's his followers they wanted him to leap off of the cross.
Yeah.
They wanted him to raise up an army. They wanted him to make some great mighty show of strength. And Jesus said, no, I'm going to show you a better way, a way that leads.
Do you think
to
justice
life.
is possible on earth?
Sometimes it's possible in certain situations. But I think we can't ever know what is perfectly just because our vision is so limited. God sees the whole situation. He sees every heart. He sees the fullness of every situation. He sees what leads up to it. He sees what comes after it. We get little slices in time. So I think we can try our best to act justly and to bring about justice. And we're called to bring about justice. But in this world, no, I don't think perfect justice is going to be, not until Jesus remakes everything.
Yeah, and I think there's two things to how we as individuals deal with this, maybe even as the church deals with it, but then how the government and politics deal with justice. I mean, we call it the judicial system, but I'm not quite so sure it's very just.
No, and it's fallen human beings making decisions with, and they're, some of them are a problem. Some of them have evil hearts and they don't care. Other people are tired and they're overworked and they're underpaid, and they're doing the best they can, with babies who are up all night, or spouses who've walked away, or parents who've died. And every human being is operating under tremendous stress and carrying a cross. And so I think most people try to do their best, but I don't know, very few of us ever really.
Yeah, and I think that's important. You talked about the the ability to look at the other person and realize that they're carrying their cross. And this is conversion. This is a grace to be able to see that, because we most often just look for our perspective. Two instances that I think of. There was a basketball coach, and I'm sure you followed this a lot, with the Phoenix Suns, right? Do you want to tell the story? Would you like me to?
You go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Well, it was in one sense, it was beautiful. His wife was killed in a vehicle, but by an individual who was on meth. And at her funeral, he said, "You pray for me and my wife, which is beautiful and right. But we need to also pray for the person who brought about this injustice." And that was so beautiful that there's another person in there that's suffering. And that's what you're saying too, to pray for that other person who is doing the injustices. And I think that our ability to recognize the brokenness in the other, and you actually, one of your letters is just that, assume brokenness from the other person.
Yeah, no, I think it is far worse to be the person who sins than to be the one who sins against.
And that's, seriously, Emily, that is such a profound grace that you're aware of that. And a compassion that you're aware of that.
Maybe because I've been such an awful person at times. No, I know when I'm angry and when I'm lashing out, like, I'm the one who's really in pain. Like, I may do a wrong to somebody, but I'm the one who's hurting myself even more, because I'm hurting, and then I'm compounding that by, and so I guess the older I've gotten, the more I've learned that people really can't do that much to me. You know, they can insult me, they can say whatever they want online about me, they can threaten my family, they can, take away my livelihood, whatever, but they can't take away my relationship with Jesus. They can't take away the peace.
Your dignity,
and they can't take that away, my value. Right. But when they are acting out in that way, they are taking away their dignity, and they're putting up a roadblock between their relationship with Christ. Like, they're hurting themselves in a far more profound way than they can hurt me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you look back now as a mother, what do you think is going to be more difficult? People doing that to you, or when that's going to happen to your kids?
I mean, I already worry about what people are going to say to my children. I worry about, I talk in the book that hate always finds its mark. And sometimes it's because it's really evident what our weaknesses are. People can see where we're going to be hurt by something. But I think the devil oftentimes directs the shot. The devil
Absolutely.
knows our weaknesses, and he just plants that seed. So I think about my kids. I think about their adoptions and people telling them that they weren't wanted when these children were desperately wanted by their birth parents and by me. They were wanted, they were loved. I think about Beckett and what people might say to him about growing up in a family with, he looks different from the rest of us. How will he struggle? I worry so much about what people will say to them, and that is one of my deepest fears. But we talk. I don't know, we give them the tools to handle that. That's the best we can do. We can love them and give them the tools of grace and reason and maturity.
I just think of, though, as Mary watching her son suffer. There's something, like, I watched my mom suffer, and there were times that I just wished I could take that on myself, but obviously I can't. But that's my suffering, right? My suffering is that there's nothing I can do to take that away. And just watching Our Lady, that she knew that was his cross to bear. And to be able to unite that is where you ultimately find a peace and a meaning and a presence. It doesn't take it away. It just gives it some sense of meaning and peace.
No, and it helps me as an adoptive mother to just remind myself that everyone's going to struggle. Whether they're adopted or not, whether they're orphaned, no matter what happens, we all have our struggles. And those struggles will look different. But there is no cross-free existence for anybody. And there are a lot worse crosses than adoption. There are so many worse things to go through. And it wouldn't matter if I'd given birth to 3, perfect, healthy babies. They would have their struggles and crosses in life. Nobody gets out of it.
No,
you don't get to parent perfect children.
And nor should we want. I mean, in that end, again, it's grace that we can say that, but ultimately we find Jesus in the cross. And there are some ways that's the only way that my heart, there's a quote that says, there are places in our heart which don't exist and into which suffering must enter so that they may, that my heart is changed and transformed and made whole and made flesh. The alternative is to have a heart of flesh. It's like, nothing's going to bother me. That's not how I want to live. That's not how I want to live. The other, just to go just a little bit more with the assumed brokenness. I had an experience when I was walking the Camino. that at the end of the day, this one host was talking about all these beautiful things that were on the route that we were supposed to see that day. And I said, every one of them, I said, I didn't see that. You didn't see that lady. I didn't see that. And it's like, why didn't I see in all these things that she talked about? And what I realized was that particular day was really difficult and my body just hurt. Like I just wanted to quit walking. And it wasn't that I was selfish, or I just could only pay attention to me, to how bad I hurt. And I didn't see the beauty. And it really changed when I prayed and reflected on that, hopefully, the way I treat other people, that it's not that she's so obnoxious or he's so selfish. Maybe that there's just something going on in his life that is so painful, that's so real, that all he can pay attention to is how bad he hurts. We make it all about me, right? But it's the whole world is not about offending me.
No, and it's really a lot where you have to get to a certain point in your own healing where you can look away from your wounds and look around at others. And that's just the beginning of charity, because if all of you're doing is looking at yourself, you can't exercise Christian charity. So that's why healing is so important, because once there's healing and you can look up and around you, you start to see that everybody's hurting.
But that healing is important, is that we need to be able to answer the question, why do I do this? Why did I behave this? The Holy Father just spoke about this just a few days ago. He said that our ability to be more aware of ourselves and why we do what we do. To say, gee, I don't know why I act that way, that is the challenge to prayer, is to go to there and say, why do I respond like that?
And that's hard because we don't want to look at the broken parts in ourselves. It is much easier to look at the broken parts in other people. Be like, look how they're struggling. Look what's wrong with that broken system over there. But you can't do anything in truth to help everybody else who's broken unless you're able to start looking at, because that helps you to understand other people better. If you can't understand yourself, how are you going to understand what's going on around you?
Yeah. You, in one of the letters you read to yourself, you caution about there's a difference between anger and vengeance and wanting to get somebody. That's real?
Yeah. I mean, there's, anger can be, like we said, it can be a righteous response. Yeah. If there is a real injustice, of course you should feel angry about that. Whether it's scandal in the church or problems in the culture, that's a just response. But then to seek to hurt the person who has done the wrong, to punish them, to not, there is a place for punishment in the justice system. But as an individual, my job is not to punish the person online who said something that I disagree with.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think we have to do is we try to, and we can do this so subtle. Would you pray for so-and-so? Because and then we go on this big list, because what we're doing is we want to gather people that believe the way we believe against that. And you caution against that.
Yeah, I've set some rules for myself with, and we'll talk more about social media later, but I don't respond publicly to criticism. I never speak negatively of a person by name. That's just I don't care how much I disagree with what you've said. I don't care how many, I might talk about the ideas that are being promoted, but I will never personally attack a person online. And I think that saves me from a whole lot of trouble.
And I think that's one of the struggles that we have in our culture today that's causing so much frustration, is we have an inability to discuss, debate, disagree on ideas. And I think part of that is because we live in a world with culture without any objective truth. So I identify what's true. So as soon as somebody says something that goes against quote unquote, and you hear it all the time, my truth, well, that's a self-definition. And then it begins to become so volatile and angry.
Life is complex and people are complex, and we're all a mix of good and evil. And I think about Hamilton, the Broadway musical. Did you watch it?
Don't get me started. I will break out in a song.
Okay, good. You should break out into song. That would liven things up a little bit. You want to?
Yeah, but people would just quit watching. Trust me, that's not a good idea.
These founding fathers, they're complex men. They have some greatness in them and they have some evil in them. We are all weeds and wheat. The weeds and the wheat is not just the people out there, it's in our hearts. And so there are people who have no problem. There's voting for pro-abortion politicians, supporting pro-abortion, people who have had an abortion. That doesn't mean they're evil.
No.
They can also be kind to their neighbor. They can be caring for their elderly parents. We're such a mix. And so this whole demonization of people, you're a good person, you're an evil person.
Well, and that's what I think, I read recently an article by a political figure, and he was saying that the American ideals are still great and they're still wonderful. That's not to say that we always do that. So oftentimes people will look to the grave mistakes, that the United States, like slavery, these grave, horrible, horrendous things that we've done, and that defines. But I don't want somebody to look at me at my worst moment. That doesn't define me. And that was his point, was that we have to recognize these things. We have to repent from them, right? But it doesn't define the fact or change the fact that the ideals of the American enterprise are a beautiful thing, and they can be wonderful. But oftentimes we look at our worst moments.
No, and so just learning to see the good and the bad in everyone, to be merciful, slower to judge, assuming the good of others. Right. It's so easy to twist what someone is saying and construe it in the worst possible way. And I think it's our first obligation is always to try to put the most charitable spin on someone's actions, someone's words.
Yeah, I just want to be in the room where it happens. All right. You said to suffer an injustice is an invitation to solidarity with Jesus, who suffered every possible injustice along the road. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah. Well, it's me just paraphrasing the saints. So it's not like it's an original thought.
But do you think that's actually possible? Do you think people actually do that?
Saints have. You look at St. John of the Cross, you look at St. Teresa of Avila, you look at so many different saints who were silenced by their religious order, imprisoned by their religious order, silenced by their bishops. I think about some of the holiest priests I know who've been functionally sent off into obscurity in, the hinterlands of the diocese. People do it all the time, but it's not something that the world celebrates and glorifies except occasionally when you get canonized.
Mm-hmm. You say, and this is, you're just kind of talking about how you're going to grow. You work for change. You talk about your time in D.C., but you say, don't put your faith in politics. Don't expect government to do what it can't. No political leader, party, or ideology will bring the justice you crave. Only Jesus can do that.
Yeah, no, so I worked in D.C. for 5 years before I went to Steubenville to get my master's in theology.
Really stepped up there.
I stepped up. I could have gone to work for the White House or the Secretary of Labor, but I came and wrote grants for you guys.
We're appreciated.
But it was, God let me move up through politics very quickly. So I was 23 and running the entire legislative office in Capitol Hill. And then I went to work for a former U.S. Attorney General. And I saw good people trying to do good things. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them they're just guessing. Jesus says the poor you're always going to have with you. And I take him at his word. We can do our best to care for the poor and love the poor and help the poor.
And people can disagree on policy on how to go about that.
How do you help the poor? Right. And that's where I would always get frustrated. I was like, well, people can care about the poor, but think that there's a better way to help them or a different way. But I saw these people and they were just throwing darts at the wall, fighting these little tiny battles. And I laugh now because a lot of the same bills and amendments and issues that 20 years ago when I was in DC, they're still fighting over it now. I said in the book, it's like Groundhog Day, it just keeps happening. And little changes happen in either direction. But what I realized and why I chose Franciscan over the White House was because I was like, no, the real change has to happen in people's hearts. Mm-hmm. Like if people don't know Jesus, if they don't know who they are and don't know who God is and don't understand sin and don't understand justice and the common good, it doesn't matter what Tom, Dick, and Harry do in Washington. Like nothing there matters. And we're just going to keep doing this one step forward, one step back, change the problem this way. Like the laws will always reflect the people. And until the people are better, the laws aren't going to be better.
And I agree. It's ultimately, it's an absolutely spiritual bankruptcy and difficulty that we have in the human heart. And that's always been the case. And I think some people put too much, make politics or a politician their idol as if they can fix everything when it's fundamental. I remember in a situation, I was with Bill Bennett, who wrote Book of Virtues and all that. They were saying, why aren't you running for office? He said, because that's not where the action is. The action is in the human heart.
That's true. And there's good people in Washington who need to be there and fight the good fight. And God calls people to hold the line. So I'm not saying that Christians have no place in politics.
No, absolutely not. They must engage.
Yeah, they must engage. But we also have to be circumspect in our expectations.
My concern, though, is, and this is a side note that we could do some of the time, is that fewer and fewer people of great character are willing to. That's really a sacrifice. We have a congressman graduated from the university, and some of the stories you hear, it's like, who's going to put up with that? Who's going to want to be able to do that? All right, real quick, you go on to say, what's going to bring about some of this change? More people going to Mass, receiving Eucharist, fasting, praying, rosary, confessions. You make some discussion. You have this chapter about reparation. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, where she's going. But that's how this is done, right?
Yeah, I mean, spiritual reparation is one of the most beautiful teachings of the church. God calls us, he left room for us to participate in his saving work. And so St. Paul talks about, how he completes through his own sufferings what's lacking in the sufferings of Christ, which is really scandalous at first. You're like, what? Like, the God of the universe didn't do enough? Like, it was super abundant. It was more than enough. And yet God asks us to do everything
invites
Jesus did.
us into
Invites
that.
us,
Yeah, which is...
He wants us to love and help heal people and work for justice, but he also asks us to offer spiritual reparation, to do acts of penance, acts of prayer, acts of service, to help atone for the sins of those around us and those who came before us. We fell as a people. Like when Adam and Eve sinned, we all fell. We were redeemed as a people when Jesus died for us. And so we are our brother's keepers. The sins of our brothers do affect us, and we have a responsibility to do what we can.
That's real faith. That's a real statement of faith that says that, and again, apart from faith and grace, this doesn't make sense, but by me fasting for a day in reparation for the sins of my brothers and sisters, that I believe that actually has an impact and makes a difference is a great step in faith. And yet I know that to be true.
Yeah. And I remember back in 2002, the bishops called for a day of fasting and penance for the sex scandals. And there were a lot of people who were like, you do fasting and penance, which on one level, I would like to see some bishops in sackcloth and ashes. That would be a nice change. But I was like, no, we all are actually called to do this. Like, this is collectively, we are called to atone for the sins of our brothers and sisters. And if we're not doing that, if we're not offering spiritual reparation, especially Catholics who believe in this, who's going to do it? Yeah. Like, we are dropping the ball. There is so much unatoned for sin in this world. There are so many people in purgatory. There are so many people who need us to pray for them.
Yes.
And if we're not doing it, then what? Go march or vote for whoever
wants.
Make it
sound like we're all supposed to be saints or something. Nice.
That's the thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at the various letters and the things that are most important to talk to yourself as a 20, you choose to deal with injustice, racism, what's going on. Why did you find that as one of the most important things that you needed to tell yourself?
Well, I was writing this book in the summer of 2020. I started writing it.
It's a great summer.
It was such a good one.
Summer of 2020.
We had some good, there were some highlights. We adopted a baby in the summer, so that was a great joy.
You're right. And that's important for us to say that, actually.
Yeah.
That there was really some wonderful and beautiful things.
There were some wonderful and beautiful things in 2020.
There were some not so.
But I started writing this book after the internet was blowing up. George Floyd had been killed. COVID was... Nobody knew. I mean, we had just come out of the worst of the lockdown.
Just stop it. Nobody knew because
nobody knew. Yeah. Nobody knew.
Still don't.
There was the election coming up that the rhetoric was just going up and up and up, and Catholics, like good Catholics, faithful Catholics, were tearing each other apart. It wasn't that I didn't have a problem with people being angry about injustice.
No. In fact, you should be. Right.
It was the vitriol. It was the tearing apart of other people. It was the lack of compassion, the lack of a response in faith, the lack of a Catholic understanding of sin.
Right.
And I was like,
Which, just real quick, I'm not going to let that go. Yeah. The Catholic understanding of sin, because this is important, that there is a structural, systemic part of sin, that sin is social. So one of the reasons I go to confession to a priest is not just because I've offended God, but I've offended you. So that Mother Teresa says, we've forgotten that we belong to one another. That is part of the nature of sin that's forgotten in this.
Yes, but also so is individual choice.
Yes.
For an act to be actually sinful, you have to have some knowledge that you are sinning, that you're saying no to God. I mean, there's venial sin that's,
of course.
And the systemic sin is always a result of individual sins. Mm-hmm. It's not just like this big thing that nobody's aware of. It's a bunch of people choosing evil that creates evil systemic sin. So I chose to really focus on this in the book because I knew it wasn't going to go away. Mm-hmm. There was a fundamental shift in how we were talking to each other, treating each other, understanding sin. And so if we don't understand how to respond to injustice as Catholics, we are only going to perpetuate more injustice.
Mm-hmm. So the one sentence that you're going to tell yourself, that you're going to hold on to, that you're going to remind your 25-year-old self about injustice and this, what do you say? What do you have to say to yourself?
You're going to find the answer in the church, not in the world. So pray, bear wrongs patiently, offer reparation, follow Christ. Like, love is what changes the day. Like, slowly, imperceptibly, not always in ways we see. But Jesus said to love, and that's what we need to do. That's more than 280 characters, but...
That's all right, we'll let it go.
Okay. Do you want a macaron?
No, I don't. I just, those never look...